As most of you guys know, I've talked about the waterfowl food web for the last couple of years. And the first year I talked a little bit about the food web associated with freshwater marshes. Last year we talked about the food web in Florida lake systems. And this year I'm going to kind of wrap things up on the Florida food web and talk a little bit about the food web of coastal marshes. I'm going to briefly start off talking about reviewing a little bit about waterfowl energetics. This kind of, for me, this kind of sets the stage and serves as a basis for talking about the food web. So we'll spend a few minutes reviewing some energetic stuff. Then we'll get specifically into the energetics. What's shift over this way?
Because you keep walking off the camera.
Gotcha, thanks. Then we'll shift in to talk specifically about waterfowl food plants in the Florida coastal marshes. Then I'll wrap the presentation up and talk a little bit about some of the popular coastal waterfowl hunting areas in the state. So with that, before I begin, how many of you guys were here last year? Quite a few hands. And the year before that, quite a few more. So y'all kind of know what I'm talking about here. And before I begin, we're gonna have a little quiz. So I want everybody to take out a sheet of paper, put your name in the top right-hand corner at number 1 through 10. Come on now. Now, all right, so one question though. I do have one question here, and this is a true or false question. Y'all ready? Ducks love complex carbohydrates. Yes? No? I see some thumbs up, thumbs down.
Repeat the question.
Ducks love complex carbohydrates. You've heard this before. Well, good. I'm glad y'all said that because, you know, complex carbohydrates represent these energy-rich molecules that ducks metabolize very quickly. And I'm assuming if some of you were thinking false, it's probably because by complex carbohydrates, you just assumed I was talking about French fries, and we'll let that slide. But nevertheless, in regards to complex carbohydrates and these energy-rich molecules, we know that waterfowl, particularly puddle ducks, captive rear studies show that ducks require 292 kilocalories of energy. And this gets them through their basic metabolic rate. This doesn't account for any activities. And if you factor in or energetic activities such as migration or thermal regulation, we know that basic metabolic rate is actually amplified or multiplied 10 to 15 times that rate, depending on the activity itself. And it's really no different than you and I. Our calorie intake for human is about 2,000, 2,200 calories per day. And of course, I think last year I used the example of Michael Phelps. That guy was consuming 10 to 12,000 calories a day training for the Olympics. Waterfowl during migration are no different. One thing to keep in mind that a kilocalorie is actually equal to 1 calorie, so don't let that confuse you at this point. But we know that waterfowl obtain most of this energy. The majority of this energy is obtained by consuming plant materials. And this could be in the form of seeds, it could be in the form of tubers, it could be in the form of rhizomes, and in some cases, there are some plants that we'll be talking about later on that waterfowl will consume the entire plant itself. This also applies to agricultural grains as well. We know, or studies show, that puddle ducks, that about 75% of their diet consists of plant material during migration, and this increases to about 90% during their wintering period. This slide here just kind of illustrates some of the energy values associated with popular waterfowl food plants. This slide also recognizes that we're looking at the gross energy of these food plants, and you can see they range anywhere from about 4 to about 5.5. As waterfowl managers, a more important variable that we rely on is what we refer to as true metabolized energy. And for moist soil plants, the ones that you see listed here, generally that true metabolized energy is about 2.5 kilocalories per gram. Now a gram is equal in weight to about a small paper clip. And the difference between true metabolized energy and gross energy is that true metabolized energy is what the animal is actually using to maintain those bodily functions. So if we were to look at fall panicum, which has a value of 4.0, and if we were to do a feeding pen study where we're feeding nothing but fall panicum to that mallard, 2.5 kilocalories of that 4 grams of energy were actually utilized by the bird, and the difference is 1.5 is excreted as waste material. So another major food group that waterfowl rely on are aquatic macroinvertebrates. And these invertebrates are primarily a spring, early summer diet of waterfowl. There are a variety of macroinvertebrates, include crustaceans such as your scuds, your side swimmers, gastropods, includes pelecypods, which is a fancy name for bivalves, or clams, clams and mussels as well, and numerous aquatic insects. Here, this particular slide shows some of the values in comparison to the plant values. This is actually true metabolized energy, and as you can see, they're kind of varied. They don't have that energy punch that the plants provide. One of the things we have to keep in mind, though, is that waterfowl, primarily puddle ducks, aren't relying on these aquatic insects to provide so much that energy, but more so to meet some nutritional requirements. Oftentimes, this could be calcium for egg production or protein itself, just to get them through growth and maintenance of bodily tissues. There's exceptions to this, and we'll see some of this later on in the presentation. So again, back on the Florida food web, the first year we talked about the importance of managing altered wetlands that have been dyed or degraded to some degree, with an emphasis on moist soil annual seed-producing plants. Last year, the emphasis was on lake systems, in which we talked about the importance of emergent wetlands, emergent vegetation, floating leaf vegetation, and then submerged aquatic vegetation. And this year, well, like I said, I'd like to kind of close this out and then talk about management, or talk about foods associated with coastal marshes. In particular, I'm looking at the marine and estuary and habitat types. Now, this slide here kind of shows, gives you a perspective of the differences of these habitat types. Let's see if I can get this. We look at, the main difference in distinguishing between the two can be related to salinities. It's probably the easiest way. Here, if you can see the slide, we have freshwater and salinities is measured usually in parts per thousand. So here you have a freshwater source, and the salinity is 0 parts per thousand. Over here at the opposite extreme, I can't really see that. Can y'all see the writing on that? Well, this is your sea strength salinities are ranging about 30 to 35 parts per thousand. This is our marine system. Somewhere in between here, this big massive front that you see in between these two is what we refer to as our estuarine or our brackish marshes. And here, salinities can range anywhere from 2 parts per thousand all the way up to 30 parts per thousand. A lot of this is influenced by your freshwater sources coming in, your rainy seasons or whatever, and it could also be influenced by your tidal activities. You have each year, once a month, when the earth, the sun, and the moon come in alignment, you have spring tides, which are your highest tides, and your neap tides, and these also have a lot of influence on what these salinities are in these estuary and marshes. When we talk about managing for waterfowl food plants in these systems, it's very important to know what these salinities are, because many of your food plants have specific salt tolerances in which they're most productive. One of the ways we monitor this is through a little device known as a refractometer. It allows an individual to go and dip this little instrument down into the water, and you simply look through the scale, and it's calibrated to read in a percentage or parts per thousand. So that's an easy tool that we can use, or managers can use, to help monitor those salinity levels. So when we talk about vegetation in marine and estuarian systems, they're not nearly as plentiful or not as nearly as diverse as we saw in the freshwater marsh systems or in the lake systems themselves. But they make up for that diversity in that they are broadly distributed. And so for the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking about 2 different types of vegetation that waterfowl managers like to manage for. The first of these are going to be the emergents. The first plant I'd like to talk about briefly is sea purslane, or sesuvium. This is probably, of all the plants I want to be talking about, is probably one of the most salt-tolerant species. It's a low-growing perennial herb. It shoots out these long stringers from a kind of a central root system. It has a small purplish pink flower, really thick succulent leaves. I'm sure many of you guys have seen it. Oftentimes you see it growing right out on top of the sand dune or in barrier islands right on top of bare sand. Waterfowl highly favor the seeds that Sesuvium produces. And Sesuvium is also unique in that it's one of the only seed-producing plants in this marine environment that responds very well to drawdowns. The next plant I want to talk about is actually kind of a group of plants. These are what we refer to as the bulrushers. And there's three different bulrushers. There's Olney's bulrush, there's three square bulrush, and there's salt marsh bulrush. Bulrushes are very easily recognized. They have this cone-shaped seed head that's about the size of your fingernail. They have this triangular-shaped stem that you see right here. Bulrushes are widely distributed. They're from Alaska to Maine to Florida and on down into Central America. You oftentimes see bulrushes growing on the edge of salt marshes or saline marshes. And they, too, are a very popular seed-producing plant for waterfowl. And in particular, their rhizomes are highly favored by waterfowl. And the St. Lawrence, anybody familiar with the St. Lawrence estuary up in Quebec and Montana, or Ontario? They have massive salt marsh estuaries up there, and greater snow geese migrating through that area. It's a major staging area for the spring and fall migration for greater snow geese. They have that short, stout bill, and in studies conducted up there, 73% of their diet consisted of salt marsh bulrush, where they're actually digging down into the plant with their beak and pushing that plant, turning the plant upside down and feeding on the rhizomes. So again, widely distributed, very favorable for waterfowl food plant. Next up is dwarf spike rush. This is a small, tufted little perennial plant. It doesn't get very big. It's only about 2 to 7 centimeters tall. You see it more in estuarine marshes and ranging in salinity, say from 5 to 20 parts per thousand. It also responds very well to drawdowns. Oftentimes when you do a spring drawdown in an estuarine marsh and you get germination of dwarf spike rush, it looks like a little golf course out there. You have this real fine little grasses. And you can come back in and flood that in the fall, and it tolerates flooding very well. And it's in waterfowl, in particular gadwalls. There's studies that was conducted in Louisiana and other Gulf coastal states that showed that 95% of their diet consisted of dwarf spike rush and 2 submergents, which include widgeon grass and muskgrass. And that kind of keys me into the next group that I'm going to talk about very briefly. This was the submerged aquatic vegetation. I forgot to mention earlier that the first letter that you see following the name refers to the value rating of the plant itself, and the second letter refers to the parts consumed by waterfowl. So muskgrass. Muskgrass is actually, it's not a vascular plant, it's actually an algae. High tolerance for salinities. You can see it growing in salinities up to 25, 30 parts per thousand. What's kind of unique about muskgrass is that because it is an algae, you oftentimes see it growing in highly nutrient water bodies. It doesn't break up under a lot of wind and wave action, so it pretty much just grows everywhere. And it's a very, very important diet. As I said, we talked about the gadwall study in Louisiana. Muskgrass is also very, very popular, particularly in the South Atlantic and the Gulf coastal states. Second species I want to talk about are the, excuse me just a minute. These are the naiads. There's actually 2 naiad species that are very common, Guadalupensis and marine naiad. Both of these are waterfowl consume the plants themselves and the seeds. Thanks, Jamie. Marine naiad is widely distributed. It's been speculated that one of the reasons it's such a wide distribution is that when waterfowl consume those seeds, as it passes through their digestive tract, that helps scarify the seeds and thus allows for quick germination of the plant. For those of you who hunt Merritt Island, we see a lot of spiny naiad up there at Merritt Island Refuge, and again, this is another important food source for waterfowl. Perhaps one of the most important waterfowl food sources that most managers look to manage for is widgeon grass. Widgeon grass is highly, highly favored by most duck species. They consume the seeds, they consume the leaves themselves, some of the stems, and oftentimes you see them consuming the entire plant. Widgeon grass is kind of particular. You know, it's got its own tolerances for salt, and ideally it prefers salinities anywhere from 8 to 15 parts per thousand. That's where you get the most robust growth out of it. I was talking to Pat Stone the other day, last night, with regards to some widgeon grass at Merritt Island, and he's seen widgeon grass growing in higher salinities up there, which probably is not all that unusual, but ideally 8 to 15 parts per thousand and a good food source for waterfowl. Last thing I want to talk about, the last submergent, is shoal grass. As many of you guys know, anybody who does a lot of fishing in Florida, particularly your coastal areas, shoal grass is widely distributed. We see it all up and down the Atlantic coast, particularly at Mosquito and River Lagoon. See it down in Florida Bay, and then it wraps up into the west coast of Florida. Shoal grass often is growing with turtle grass and manatee grass. Something in particular I wanted to kind of grade 8 into is highlight 2 particular species of waterfowl, and one of these is redheads. There's shoal grass is a major diet for redhead ducks wintering in the Gulf coastal areas, particularly in the area you see highlighted here. In fact, 2 of the most extensive seagrass beds in North America occur here in Florida Bay, and in this particular region here from Tampa Bay or Tarpon Springs up to Apalachicola Bay. In fact, you have seagrasses growing out 10 to 15 miles out into the Gulf. And if one of the particular reasons that what redheads like it is this little rhizome that extends down from there. Although redheads will eat the entire plant, for some reason they like keying in on those rhizomes. But what's unique about it is in the Gulf coastal states, we found that shoal grass made up about 75% of the diet of redheads. About 25% of the diet consisted of gastropods, and which is really not surprising because gastropods, we know these snails, they like feeding on algae, and oftentimes when you see the shoal grass growing, there's often algae associated with it. Whether or not redheads are consuming gastropods as a byproduct of eating the plant, or whether they're keying in on them, I don't know. But another animal matter that was an important part of their diet, in addition to gastropods, are the clams. And this kind of leads me into the second waterfowl species I wanted to highlight, and this is lesser scalp. How are we doing on time? Okay. As most of you guys know, Florida overwinters a majority of the Atlantic flyway population on lesser scalp. We see scalp populations in Apalachicola Bay, we see them in Tampa Bay, but invariably a majority of that population hangs out in this little area here, Merritt Island Refuge, Indian River Lagoon, Mosquito Lagoon, and the Banana River. Again, a lot of coastal studies have been done on scalp, feeding behavior of scalp in the Gulf coastal states that show about 76%, or about 60% of their diet consisted of animal matter, 40% plant matter. Another study that was conducted by Garth Herring. You all familiar with Garth's work that was done at Merritt Island? Now, he did a study at Merritt Island about 10 years ago that showed about 90% of their diet consisted of animal matter. And in particular, both studies in the Gulf and Garth's study in the Atlantic, we found that waterfowl or lesser scalp were keying in on pelecypods, the Tampa and the pointed Venus, but it also included gastropods and grass shrimp crustaceans as well. So this is kind of 2 examples here where we're talking about diving ducks and where their diet shifts a little bit as compared to puddle duck diets. To kind of wrap things up here, I just wanted to follow up, talk about some of the really popular coastal areas for waterfowl hunting. I briefly talked about a couple of these, that being, one of these being the Merritt Island area and the shoal grass beds that extend from Tampa, Tarpon Springs up to Apalachicola. 2 of our managed impoundments I like to highlight. One is Hickory Mountain. Is Sharon Hester here? No. Hickory Mountain Impoundment is in Taylor County, Florida. I don't know how well y'all can see this, but this is the outer edge of the impoundment as it faces the Gulf. And it's about 1,500 acre impoundment. About half that impoundment is forested wetlands, and it gradates into this beautiful estuary and marsh. And it's also very popular for crabbing and fishing, as well as pretty decent duck hunting. And again, that's located up in Taylor County. Another area I want to introduce to y'all or make y'all aware of is the Guana River Wildlife Management Area. Justin, where are you? Stand up. Justin Ellenberger, he's the biologist there at Guana River. Guana has kind of a unique area. It basically extends right up here is the Atlantic Ocean. So Guana basically has from the Atlantic Ocean all the way over to the intercoastal. It's got literally thousands of acres of estuary and marsh, and it has these two managed impoundments. This is a picture of Lake Ponte Vedra that you see here, which is, Justin informs me, 2,200 acres. I should have remembered this, being as I started there. And Diego Pond, which is about 20 acres. And very quickly, two other popular areas for coastal hunting includes the Tampa Bay area, particularly Cockroach Bay and some of these areas in there. And finally, mosquito impoundments. And this is that same principle that Merritt Island was established. You know, Indian River Lagoon is about 156 miles long or something like that. And you have the series of mosquito impoundments that start up here in Volusia County and extend down into Brevard County, Indian River County, and also down into St. Lucie County as well. And these are also very popular areas for waterfowl hunting, and you get a mixture of both diving ducks and puddle ducks in there. So just to kind of quickly close this thing out, a lot of the information that I presented here came out of this publication that was conducted and put out by the Atlantic Coast Joint Venture and Ducks Unlimited. I just spoke to Jamie, and he says he's got literally boxes of this brochure. If anybody wants to copy, I would suggest you get in touch with myself or Jamie. And Jamie also informed me if you want to Google this online, he said there's a PDF version that you can download online. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention and thank you for putting up for me for the last 3 years. And if we got time, I'll be glad to entertain any questions.